Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hope and Healing Chats, where we discuss everything dealing with sex addiction and partner betrayal trauma. Our goal is that these conversations help you to restore hope while on your healing journey. My name is Monifa Ellis-Addie. I am a CSAT and a betrayed partner specialist, and I work at Banyan Therapy Group, where I've been helping individuals and couples work with sex addiction and betrayal trauma issues for the past 7 years. Today's topic, we're going to take a trip down to Trigger City, but first, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. To accompany us on the trip down to Trigger City, we have a friend to the show. He's a co-author of the Disclosure series. He is the clinical director of Banyan Therapy Group, as well as a CSAT and betrayed partner specialist. Welcoming back Dan Drake. Welcome back.
Thanks, Monifa. Good to join you.
So today's topic, we will be going down to Trigger City, but first, I'd like to put a disclaimer. Talking about triggers can be triggering. So make sure if you need some extra support, click on the info in the description. We'll have some grounding exercises and extra info if needed. So I wanted to talk about triggers because betrayed partners and sex addicts, this topic comes up very often, and there's always a lot of confusion about like how it is for the other one, or they're applying how it works for them for the other person, and there's a lot of psychoeducation that has to be provided around that. So I first wanted to ask the question of just what are triggers like at its core, if we're to strip it down.
Yeah, I guess like at its core, a trigger is something that's activating my nervous system and typically putting me in a fight or flight response.
All right, so a trauma
A trauma
response.
response. I do, I think they do look different for partners and for addicts, and I think that's where it gets confusing for a lot of people. So I'm assuming that's where we're going to talk some about.
Yep. Go right into it. So how does it look different? Or how is it different and how is it the same? We already said it's a trauma response, right? So that's the similarities, but how does it show up?
Yeah, I think for addicts, typically the addiction starts early for them at some point in their development. So it could be they experience some sort of trauma, physical, sexual, emotional abuse of some kind, and then they learn to cope in a somehow using sexuality as a way to cope. So that's the overgeneralization simplification. Um, Oftentimes when someone's put in that same situation on the addict, the addict's put in a similar situation that reminds them of some of the stuff from the past. They'll have a sexual cue to go act out. Kind of, it may be easier to think of it like alcoholic. An alcoholic
Mhm.
gets triggered, something happens, and then they get, activated, and then they want to go take a drink. I think similar thing for sex addicts. I think what's tricky, and this is where it gets different, I think, between partners and addicts, and we can talk partners, but I think for the sex addict, the difference is there's all kinds of sexual trigger cues out there anyway. So it's not like, I think at the core there might be something that I'm put in a similar situation to when I was abused. So let's say I had a really critical, overbearing alcoholic father and was really emotionally abusive to me. So I just developed this sensitivity to criticism. Then when my boss is, I end up in a situation at work and I've got a boss who's very belittling and condescending. And I feel some of that same
Mhm.
stuff that I felt from the past. That might be the cue going underneath all the surface. The activation may come up. I could be triggered. I might not even know that I'm triggered by that because it puts me back in that situation from the past, but I've learned how to cope with life in a sexual way. So, okay, now I'm pulled to go act out sexually. I might not even be aware of this, conscious of it, but there's something that what I'm conscious of is the sexual cue. I see something, I think about something, I engage something sexually. A lot of times underneath the surface, though, there's all this stuff that's been going on potentially for that person. So I think what's a little different is this a long-standing pattern. It's been, there's history of it, and the person now is entering their world kind of in a sexualized world. They're looking around for other people, or they're cruising. They're doing all kinds of things that might be kind of reactivating that trauma. They don't even, maybe not even aware of it.
And I think that's important that you mentioned that they're not even aware of it, because they get so focused on the sexual triggers. Because last times I know when working with addicts, they're like, "Oh, I'm not even triggered," and it's like they don't even realize the fight that they had at work is the thing that's
Right,
actually triggering them 3 days from now.
right.
But it's not the actual. It gets very uh, simplified into just sexual triggers, not realizing it doesn't work that way. So there always has to be some building of awareness around what that looks like for triggers, which I always think is important for partners to know, because they say, well, I want him to know when they're triggered. It's like they don't even know that they're triggered. They have no awareness around that right now. So it's not really something we can ask for,
But
at
just
least
on
in the
that, I think
beginning.
because you're right, and I think that's the important thing. Because sometimes I totally get it for safety seeking partners want to know,
Yeah.
almost get the objectification report. Who did you notice, or what did you think about? What websites did you click, or were you on a social media site or doing X, Y, and Z? Which I get it, like that. You want to see, is that person triggered to go act out sexually? To me, I think what we're talking about is that underneath layer of all this, that a lot of times sex addicts learn to cope with non-sexual things or needs in a sexual way. So it
Hmm.
could be my, I have this negative core belief about being unlovable and worthy and deserving, bad, defective. That stuff gets triggered or activated. And now I want to like find a way to medicate and self-soothe because I feel those things and I don't want to feel those things. I think that's the underneath layer that the addicts need to get to. And that takes a lot of work because they usually don't have the awareness or insight to that, or don't want to sometimes.
Exactly. You're not going to get that in the beginning.
Right.
It's going to take a while to get there. Um, but now, so that's the addicts. Now about the partner side, what do triggers look like for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to the core of what betrayal trauma does and what it does. I mean, the trigger for the partner is now threat cues. Basically, their system saying you're in danger. So that's what the trigger does, and it's actually really adaptive because we don't. If I've been injured by something, I don't want to. I don't know. Even on a physical example, like if I do something, I don't want to do the same thing again and have the same result and be injured again. So our
Hmm.
systems are
Yeah.
wired to say that's dangerous. Don't do that again. For a trade partner, when there's the sexual injury, um, there's is cues that will like um, remind the partner of anything sex. So it could be actually just seeing another person out in the world, another woman, another person could be a trigger. So anything that's going to be a potential threat, now my system is going to be on heightened alert for to protect myself so that I'm not in danger anymore. So I think that the betrayed partners triggers will be they'll look very much like um, um, a web that kind of springs off of the initial discovery or the initial
Hmm.
wounding. It could be like, let's say the initial discovery was walking in on your significant other, on a device, acting out on a device. Now, just seeing them in another room on a device might be triggering, or maybe you saw some things that they were doing. Could be all those things are now going to be cues, danger cues that the partner's cued into.
And I think that's important that you said that it's like a web from the initial discovery. I think many times, just like I mentioned with the addicts, how they have these past stuff that they come and bring into the relationship. And the addicts will be like, oh, well, they already were distrusting, or they were already um, on high alert. Like they already had these things before this discovery even happened, not realizing, number one, they probably didn't have these things in relation to them, because that was their safe space. And it's also exasperated. Like now it's, if it was at 20% because they're dealing with it, now it's at 90 to 100%. Like, so it doesn't absolve discovery just because these things, there might have been traits of these things prior to.
Mhm.
Oh, I thought I froze. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Yep.
So what does it look like inside the body? Like, and I know, I mean, it's the same, it's a trauma response, but sometimes people don't realize that they're triggered until they're already triggered. So how can they become aware of that, of knowing that a trigger is happening so that they can get ahead of it?
Yeah, that's so many. It's everybody's so different, so it's hard to say. But it's typically what happens. Your nervous system goes into threat mode and protection mode. So we're going to be wired to then. It could look like um, hypervigilance. It could look like I'm scanning my environment. Looking for, I don't know. Let's say a specific Mm, I have someone, I won't say specifics, but they knew the characteristics of an acting out partner, a fair partner, and what they look like. So everybody that had similar characteristics of that person, now they're scanning the environment for someone, for people that look like that, because the whole system is saying that was dangerous, that affected your relational safety and your own physical safety. So that kind of person is unsafe. It's an exaggeration of that kind of safety response, which is obviously debilitating to walk around the world that way. But it could look like, um, yeah, you're more anxious and elevated, heart rate going up. Notice looking around a lot more. Um, Questions. There's sometimes partners will ask a lot of questions. They need
Mhm.
reassurance and security. So there's a lot of things. I think just anything with the sympathetic nervous system, that kind of increased threat response is going to be more activated. Maybe you might start seeing it for some partners. I There's a lot of wisdom that our gut tells us. Do you notice that you have more IBS and you're going to the bathroom more? Your systems, it's activated, it's moving. So do you notice
Yeah.
that, some of those cues? Um,
How can
yeah.
they become aware of, kind of sometimes we'll give them like grounding exercises and things to work through the trigger, but then they're like, well, I don't want to get that far down the trigger. How can they become aware of this before the trigger? Is there a way to slow it down?
Well, I think you mentioned when we talked about trigger map a bit ago. Sometimes it's helpful to know. Maybe we don't even know what's triggering. Like I don't know how associated these things are. Could be even, for example, how many. It's really normal for partners to start being triggered around the month of D-Day, or around when it's getting closer to Discovery Day. They may not even consciously be aware of it. Like let's say Discovery was in May, and coming into spring there's already something there, or coming into May there's something that they're already starting getting more irritable, for example. You're noticing it, you don't even aware of it. Sleep might be affected. So some of those there might be some cues. So I think mapping out, oh, it makes sense that around this time of year you start to get more threatened, because that was when it was danger, the danger initially happened. So I think mapping some of those things out, and then you can say, oh, when I'm in this certain environment, or I'm doing this certain thing, or there's this cue that reminds me of the discovery or of the trauma. Like going back to that can be helpful. Knowing, and I think just mapping out in your own nervous system. Uh, Sometimes having
Mm-hmm.
devices, there's a lot of different devices that track your heart rate and your so being able to track some of those things could be helpful too, to see if you're getting more elevated, your anxiety's spiking, um, sleep disturbance, concentration difficulties. Some of those things might be cues.
And in addition to that, for sex addicts, doing things like the circle plan, where you're mapping out, especially the middle circle, your triggery stuff, the emotional triggers, the environmental triggers, the spiritual triggers, like where you're mapping out, once again, it's just another version of mapping, um, to figure out what those things are. Something I like telling partners specifically is if they practice things like meditation and things getting in their body, that maybe even if you don't know that something's about to be triggering, being aware of where do you feel it first in your body. Because if you can be aware of where you feel it first in your body, then you can go into whatever grounding thing you have in your toolbox that you like to go to. Because sometimes it's like when there's too far down the road, it takes a long time to calm down and get back.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and that being able to get more in touch with your body if you're not in your body, because sometimes that's
Mm-hmm.
just it. Like there's a disconnect. I'm only in my head, or I have big emotions, and being able to track this before it gets there, totally understandable that there's going to be activation. So how do we, you know doing a body scan? That's a simple thing you can do, starting from, some people start head to toe, some you can start toe to head, like going through your system. What are you noticing? Do I even know? Oh, I'm noticing there's a bunch of tension in my shoulders, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm clenching my jaw, or my there's certain things happening. My guts in knots right now, and I sort of just living, because that's my new normal. I'm operating that way, but maybe it's not. Maybe not always. Are there some moments, or that it's you feel more grounded in your body than others? Like I think there's we there are it's normal for us to fluctuate at different times. So finding out, like, when am I most grounded? What does that look like? How do I feel safer in my environment or my body.
Yeah. And then in raising that awareness, like I have, I know for one client, if she did deep belly breathing to the point where it kind of hurt because she felt it in her gut the most, that was the thing that, activated her vagus nerve and made her calm down. So when you're in a triggering situation that it's like catches you by surprise, you know where you feel it in your body so that you can do what you need to do to calm it down as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Um, so sex addicts and betrayed partners, we're in a couple. What do we share with each other when it comes to triggers? Do we share everything? Something? What does that look like? I feel like that is a big topic.
um, my hope would be that I'll start with the partners, that the partner would be able to share their triggers, because I think
Yeah.
that's really important. Because how do I say it? The addict, these triggers became triggers because of the betrayal and the rupture for the partner. So part of the healing is for the addict to be able to hold space for the partner as they're triggered, and to hopefully move through that through using trigger buster techniques, AVR, other kinds of techniques that can help build, acknowledge, validate, reassurance for the partner, so that we can kind of move through those triggers, and the addict can actually have a really big helpful part in doing that to make things more worse. Sometimes they make things worse, or we can actually, on the other side, make things better. So I do think it's really helpful for the partner to share those, um, so that the couple can start to heal. And I don't know how many, I'm sure you see this too. Many addicts I've worked with, they may actually notice that the partner's triggered. They can tell. They don't want to deal
Hmm.
with it. They're like, oh, we,
Yeah.
we passed some part of, I know there's this, whatever, triggering part of town. We're driving through it. It goes silent in the car. He's not saying anything. She's not saying, it just gets quiet. Nobody's saying anything. And the act's like, well, and they think like if we got through this and it wasn't there weren't fireworks and explosion, that it was okay. But on the
Yeah.
partner side, that's not a win. Like,
Hmm.
if the partner's triggered, unless said otherwise, I mean, I'm sure there's other situations where the partner doesn't want the addict to engage, but most of the time the partner would want the addict to do something or say something about it, noticing it. I see that, I notice that it looks like you're triggered. Are you triggered? And finding a way, what would be helpful for that particular partner, instead of just avoiding it. Many people I've worked with want to avoid it and just get through it, and then that doesn't actually move or heal anything.
Yeah. I've often heard, I don't want to rock the boat. And I'm like, the boat's capsized. Like
Yeah,
it's over.
it's already
Like you're
rocked.
not saying
Right,
anything doesn't mean that it's still.
right,
Um, and also getting them to reframe that this is actually an opportunity. Like it's an opportunity for you to, even if you mess it up, just exercise that new way of talking, trying to show up and acknowledge and validate, reassure, um, trying to show some empathy. Just an effort will go a long way. It's better than just not saying anything at all, because now it's just a reminder, most likely, of how things were happening, prior to discovery.
right. Which, in another point on that, I think that's so important. Uh, that's a whole other topic we could probably spend a lot of time on, with that tool AVR, acknowledge, validate, reassure.
Hmm.
With that, I've seen a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to follow this formula. If I use this,
Yeah.
my partner's going to de-escalate, trigger goes away, I'm a hero, I get all this validation for doing the right thing, and then they feel good and we're all good again. I mean, that's
Yeah.
overly simplified, but that's where a lot of people, addicts, go to.
Yeah.
That's not as Sometimes it happens that way, but more realistically, this is speaking to addicts, when you do the right thing, when you do show that, it offers a space for your partner to actually show up and bring more of themselves. So actually, when you do show empathy, when you do validate, when you do kind of acknowledge things, your partner actually may heighten. They may actually have more space. They may take more space to share more of their feelings. The trigger may shift too, by the way. That's the other thing. You might be doing the right thing, but the partner may shift from being triggered by that particular moment to saying, this is just a script that you learned. How do I believe, what you're saying is actually coming from your heart? And then, if you start getting defensive because, this thing doesn't work and it's never enough for you. If you go there, we've lost it. You just missed the fact that you did the right thing, but the trigger shifted, and now we have to, go reassure with a new trigger. So there's a lot of nuances with this, and it's
Yeah.
really difficult because Yeah, it's just really difficult to do, but the tool does work over time.
Um,
It does work.
and just
But
to,
go good.
but I was gonna say a little tidbit on that when you said the partner may be like it's a script. I always say to the addicts, well, isn't it? Like, what are you getting defensive about? Like, it is a script. Like, be honest. Like, there's nothing to be defensive about. It is a script. You're practicing. It's a new exercise. So there's nothing to be defensive about. Um,
Right.
because it wasn't
Which,
the key.
well, and I think one key about being able to do any of this, which I guess is the crossover with your earlier question, what to share about triggers. If the partner's triggered, as the addict has to be able to start to self-soothe, regulate themselves first. They have to
Mhm.
take care of themselves first so that they can be there for the partner. Like if I'm activated, one of my triggers is people being mad at me or something. If now my partner's triggered and they're mad at me and I'm off offline and I'm not able to actually be empathetic because I'm in my own shame or defensiveness or whatever, we're gonna lose everything. That ship is now sinking worse. So how important it is for the addict especially to really work on grounding themselves, getting clear on their own triggers, nervous system, how to keep them self-regulated so that you can be there for your partner. Because otherwise, you have two people that are brains are offline. It's not going to, if I'm in shame, I can't be empathetic at the same time because I'm only thinking about myself. So we have to work on that stuff on the addict side, so it can be empathetic for the partner.
Which leads us to what does the sex addict share with the partner when it comes to trigger?
That's such a good question. It's so tricky because there's so many. Every relationship's different with how they approach this. Generally, what I say, and this is, if people know the circle plan, this is middle circle or yellow circle stuff we're talking about. Yellow zone. I usually recommend, some partners want to know every sexual cue or trigger. Who did you objectify that day? Did you have any whatever? What happened in your head? That and that might be helpful for a season, but generally that
Yeah.
doesn't lead to safety for the partner. What I usually find helpful is the addict getting to do their own deep work. What was it that got stirred up for me? Oh, this situation that I was in at work where I felt belittled and I felt like I could never I felt like such a failure and like I wasn't good enough, really stirred me up. And what I did, and then that the underlying trigger to share that, but then also what you did about it. What I did, I
Mhm.
really I did some internal affirmations. I did some prayer meditation for a minute, and then I called my sponsor to reach out, and so I felt a lot better, and I was able to go back to work and in a better headspace. Like that's a trigger versus saying the other part. Maybe I started scrolling Instagram and was just looking for hits of validation somewhere because I felt such like defective and less than. I mean, that all might be true, but what do we do to get back to kind of the right headspace and right posture?
Which
So
is the most important thing because
it is,
that's recovery.
assuming that person is in good recovery, they are bringing this stuff to their team, they are working it through instead of just not addressing it, because obviously that's problematic if the person is engaging in middle circle sexual behaviors that are that is a slippery slope to the middle to the inner circle. So we have to. I'm not saying that's not important, but how much gets shared in the relationship, that's delicate, and I can imagine there's many partners that would have bristle at that. Not that would be potentially triggering because then they feel like, oh, now you're keeping secrets from me.
Yeah. Yeah. Or what do you say when, let's say the sex addict keeps coming back and saying, I'm not triggered. I wasn't triggered. I wasn't triggered. And then the partner's like, well, I don't believe that. Because that's a whole nother subject. That's another conversation also.
Well, maybe that's a good question. Maybe it's what we're talking about. What are we talking triggered? What
Mm.
is the person meaning? Are they, first of all, is it a bold faced lie and they were triggered, they just don't want to say it? and that's obviously a problem. We can't have that, because if the partner's feeling it and there's something in their nervous system or their intuition that's saying, I can feel it right now. You're different. You're different right now
Yeah.
than you were. That's not going to work. If the person's uh, not aware of it, I guess what's the definition? Because I got is it I got I don't know. I'm using the word activated. I got something got activated, stirred up in me today. So I guess is it person lying about it? We can't lie. That's not gonna. It's never gonna work in the relationship to heal. If you're gonna continue to lie, this it's gonna be really hard to heal. But if it's an
Yeah.
awareness thing, I think that's the work to keep doing, of going back to program, going back to therapy, going back to what's happening in me to share. If the partner's really asking, like that's the other thing too. Um, I don't know what your take is. If the I think rebuilding trust after betrayal really needs transparency. So if the partner's saying, I need this level of detail, if the partner, specifically related to sexual cues, if the addict is saying, no, I'm not going to share that, that's with my sponsor, that's not going to go well for the partner. I think
Hmm.
that's on the partner's job to talk to their team and say, okay, what do I really need from this? Is it knowing every single thought that he had during the day, every single person that he noticed? Is that what's really going to build safety for me? I mean, I think that's their work to do, but if the partner's really needing this for now, my take is to share it, give transparency. I don't know what you'd say. I mean, I know
Yeah.
there's tricks, there's tricky, but
Which also leads me to another point is uh, like you said, this is the level of transparency they need right now, right? Like if we are consistent, things are going well enough, then the intensity of triggers and things will die down, and this level of intense transparency most likely won't be necessary anymore once some trust is built.
right. If usually, there are some exceptions, but if the addict is really doing their work, they're really in good recovery, they're really with a spirit of trying to be fully transparent. It's more inconsistency. That's the other thing too. If the partner is not
Yeah.
seeing enough consistency, not perfect, but let's say 90%, that they're being consistent with what they're saying and doing, and that will help rebuild safety and security for the partner. Which hopefully, again, this is if these are all trauma cues for the betrayed partner, that's what the triggers are. If the addict's providing that safety and reassurance, then hopefully those do go down. We see those go down over time because they're showing themselves safe and trustworthy.
Yeah, because and I think it's different once again from partners to addicts. Because lots of times the question comes up of do triggers go away? Am I always going to feel like this? And if like for betrayed partners, intensity does die down, but for I guess addicts, the same also intensity may or their management of it probably becomes better. Maybe not necessarily the intensity, but it's not so in the forefront anymore because they've been practicing and doing things differently. So it looks different.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's a couple things I was gonna say about that. I'm not sure if that's too off topic, but yeah, I think the trigger, you can still be triggered, and I
Yeah.
think that's not a sign that we're I think that can be really discouraging. Like, wait, I'm going to be triggered forever. I mean, think of the partner. No, it doesn't work. It's not quite like that. But think of how many times a day are you triggered right now in this state, in this space. The intensity goes down, the frequency goes down, but there may be something you have a reminder from the past, and something comes up. I don't know what it would be. So usually the intensity can go down over time, and then also hopefully enough's been built in the relationship where if you're partnered, your significant other, the addict, can actually come and provide all that safety reassurance instead of the old pattern. So it's even more, like you said, the opportunity can still be there for even more relational healing when, you know whatever, out of nowhere, out of left field, you have a question like, are you still sober? Or, on this business trip, did you do such and such? And then yeah, it can, it makes sense that you would ask that, because I really betrayed you in the past, and I broke your trust. So no, I wasn't acting out, and I'm happy to share whatever, blah blah blah, all these things, like if coming with a posture of openness, not defensiveness, even if it's months or years down the line can go a long way towards continued relational safety.
And I also think it's important to note that many times as you're going through this and triggers are dying down, you don't even notice that because you're just living life and just doing whatever. So it's not uncommon where they'll be like, well, I'm still triggered. And then when you go back and look, it's like, but this, you're not the same triggered as you were a month from, before. Or one couple told me they didn't realize it until the partner went grocery shopping and the addict was like, oh, I'm just going to stay home and watch football. And that was it. There was no, he wasn't triggered to act out, and she didn't make a comment about him staying home. Like, no one even thought about it till like, a few weeks later when it was pointed out, like, oh, it was just a basic interaction with nothing. Nobody was triggered coming into it. So it's important to do things like journaling, talking things over with your team, like so you can actually track and monitor this. Because then, if not, and you're not being present about it, you can be triggered, a year from now, and you'll be telling yourself it's the same as before when it's not actually the same as before.
I think that's so important. I think it's really, really, really important because, just think of how these threat cues work in our body, how we're wired as humans. We're going to, if two things are equal and I've got a threat cue and a positive cue happening at the same time, I'm going to be more focused on what's dangerous than I am what's
Mm-hmm.
positive. Because why? Because that's going to potentially disrupt or hurt my survival. So just to
Exactly.
notice, that's, we tend to notice those things that are dangerous and threatening versus those things that aren't. So we may think that there's no shift or it's still as dangerous when maybe it's not. So I think it's a really good point to have some sort of, and I think having a team of people who know you, who can also see the differences, potentially also journaling or other ways that you can track
Mm-hmm.
what you're seeing is different, and noticing, definitely keep vigilant. And I'm not, yeah, obviously stay vigilant with the threat cues, but make sure, don't lose sight of the positive changes, that growth that's happening within you, or even in the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you have anything else to say about triggers? I feel like we covered such a
I
nuanced
just want
thing.
to, like, I guess it's more encouragement. I know for a lot of people that are in the midst, and it feels like triggering every day and every night, triggered, partners triggered till
Mm-hmm.
middle of the night. It can feel so demoralizing, so hopeless and helpless. I know these might just be words, but I think just encouraging, like, there is a way through. Like, you can rebuild safety in your own nervous system. You can rebuild that safety for yourself. It might not, you might not see the light at the end of the tunnel, but it is there. Like, we see this happen every day for people move through this.
Yeah.
So don't be discouraged. Don't lose hope.
Yes. 100%. Thank you, Dan, for stopping by again. Thanks again to Dan for joining us on this trip. And if you want to reach Dan or myself or just reach out to the show, make sure you check out the info in the description below. And if you have not already, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And as always, remember to embrace your healing journey. Every step forward brings a new hope for tomorrow. See you next time.